President Alassane Ouattara was sleeping in his luxurious bed in the palace. The latest €200 million development aid from France was secure. Everything was under control. Until, boom! The palace doors shattered. General Doumbia and just 12 soldiers entered. The strange thing was, there were no gunshots. Even stranger, the only thing in the general's hand was a question. "Mr. President," said Doumbia, "I'm going to ask you one question. If you answer truthfully, you'll still be alive tomorrow." Ouattara's knees began to tremble, because he could guess what the question would be. The clock showed 3 a.m. Abidjan's humid air was seeping through the palace windows. Ouattara woke up drenched in sweat. Was he dreaming? Number standing before him in uniform was General Seiko Dumbia. Behind him, 12 soldiers. That was all. Ouattara's mind began racing. Where was the palace's 200-man guard unit? The French advisors? The private security team? None of them were there. There was only silence. And this silence was more terrifying than gunfire. "General Doumbia," said Ouattara, trying to control his voice. Is this a coup?" Doumbia slowly approached. There was neither anger nor hatred on his face, just a tired determination. "A coup? No, Mr. President. This is a reckoning." Ouattara swallowed. He tried to put a robe over his pajamas, but his hands were shaking. In his 30-year political career, he had survived many crises, but he had never faced anything like this. His enemies usually wanted either money or power. Doumbia wanted neither. "What do you want?" asked Ouattara. Doumbia pulled out a folded paper from his pocket. "I'm going to ask you a question. Just one question. If you answer truthfully, you'll survive this night. If you lie..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ouattara's brain was sounding alarms. What could this question be? Financial accounts? Secret agreements? His connections with France? Doumbia knew about all of them, clearly. But which one would he ask about? "Let's make a deal first," said Ouattara, trying to negotiate. "If I tell you the truth, you'll let me go free. You'll allow me to go into exile." Doumbia shook his head. "Number? You'll just stay alive. The rest will be the people's decision." At that moment, Ouattara understood. This wasn't just about him. This was about the entire system. The system he had built, managed, and enriched himself through for 30 years with France's support. And Doumbia wanted to destroy this system. With just one question. Outside the palace, Abidjan was waking up. The first lights were beginning to appear on the horizon. There was no news on the radios yet. Social media was silent. Nobody knew what was happening, but in a few hours the whole world would know. "Ask your question," Ouattara finally said. There was no escape now. Doumbia unfolded the paper. He fixed his eyes on Ouattara's eyes and asked, "What was the real value of all the cocoa, coffee, gold, and oil that Ivory Coast exported in the last 10 years? And how much of that value stayed in the country?" Ouattara's face turned white as a sheet. He knew the answer to this question. Everyone knew, actually. But nobody said it out loud. They couldn't, because this answer would be a confession of the entire neo-colonial system. I don't know the exact figures," he stammered. One of the soldiers behind Doumbia stepped forward. He had a tablet in his hand. "With your permission, General," he said. He showed the screen to Ouattara. Secret reports from the central bank, IMF correspondence, agreements made with French companies. Everything was there. "I'm asking again," said Doumbia. "The real figures?" Ouattara's throat was dry. The words got stuck in his throat. 10 years. He had been hiding these figures for 10 years. From Parliament, from the people, even from his own ministers. Only he knew. He and a few people in Paris. 2 trillion CFA francs, he finally said, his voice cracking. "We exported raw materials worth about €3 billion. And what stayed in the country?" Now came the most. "Just what?" "Just played the game," said Ouattara in a broken voice. "Like everyone else. Everyone has played the same game since Houphouët-Boigny. I played too. But at least I brought stability to the country. There was no civil war. The economy grew." "Whose economy?" asked Doumbia. "Abidjan's showcase skyscrapers? Or the villages without electricity? The neighborhoods without clean water?" Ouattara couldn't answer. He had no answer. The lies he had been telling himself for 30 years were collapsing one by one. At that moment, phones started ringing. The red phone on Ouattara's desk. The Paris line. Doumbia picked up the phone, put it on speaker. Hello, Ouattara? The voice of French Ambassador Jacques Mercier. What's happening? We're getting reports. Ambassador Mercier, said Doumbia. This is General Doumbia. President Ouattara is currently making some statements. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, General, I hope you realize what you're doing. France ... What will France do? Asked Doumbia. Send troops? In 2023? With what excuse? While the world is watching? Mercier's voice hardened. Economic sanctions, trade embargo, cutting off IMF loans. Do it, said Doumbia. You're already stealing 88% of our money anyway. Take the rest too. Let's see if Ivory Coast will collapse or your game in Africa. The phone hung up. Silence in the room again. Ouattara was now truly alone. The power he had trusted and taken refuge in for 30 years had abandoned him in one phone conversation. What happens now? He asked, his voice hoarse. Doumbia walked to the window. The sun was rising. Abidjan was waking up. Now you'll tell the truth to the people, in front of cameras. Everything. The figures, the agreements, how France controls everything. Everything. What if I refuse? Doumbia turned. There was a bitter smile on his face. If you refuse, this information will still be revealed. But without you, and the people will remember you as a traitor. But if you confess, maybe, just maybe, you'll gain a shred of respect. As the man who told the truth, Ouattara thought, he had no options. He would either die as a traitor or confess and maybe be forgiven. No, he wouldn't be forgiven, but at least he wouldn't suffer from a guilty conscience. Okay, he finally said. I'll talk. I'll tell everything. Doumbia nodded. He signaled to his soldiers. Prepare everything. We'll do a live broadcast at 9 a.m. Notify all television channels. The soldiers went into action. Ouattara stood up, staggered. Doumbia held his arm. General, said Ouattara, can I ask something? Ask. You. What will you become? Will you take power? Doumbia shook his head. Number, I'm just cleaning up. The power will belong to the people. Really this time? Do you believe that? Do you really think it will work? Doumbia stopped. He looked at Ouattara. I don't know, he said honestly. But we have to try. I'd rather fail honestly than live like you. These words deeply wounded Ouattara, but he was right. He had lived in lies for 30 years. Maybe it was time to tell the truth. It was approaching 9 a.m. Televisions were turned on everywhere in Abidjan. Cafes, homes, offices, schools. Everyone was in front of screens. Social media had gone. The makeup artist approached. Mr. President, should we? No, said Ouattara. No makeup. Let them see me as I am. The lights came on. The red recording light blinked. The cameraman counted down with his fingers. 3, 2, 1. Dear people of Ivory Coast, Ouattara began. His voice was trembling but clear. I owe you the truth. The truth I've been hiding for 30 years. The truth about who really controls our country. In homes across Ivory Coast, people leaned forward. In the markets, vendors stopped selling. In the fields, farmers put down their tools. Everyone was listening. When I came to power, Ouattara continued, I made a deal. Not with you, the people who elected me, but with France. They promised support, stability, prosperity. In return, they wanted control. He paused, swallowed hard. The words were difficult, each one a nail in the coffin of his legacy. The cocoa you grow, the coffee you harvest, the gold from our mines, the oil from our shores. I let them take it, not at fair prices, not for the benefit of our nation, but for their profit and for mine. Gasps echoed across the country. Even those who suspected couldn't believe they were hearing it confirmed. The numbers, the real numbers are staggering. In the last 10 years alone, we exported 3 billion euros worth of raw materials. Do you know how much stayed in Ivory Coast? 12%, just 12%. The rest went to French companies, to offshore accounts, to consultancy fees that were nothing but bribes. In Paris, phones were ringing frantically. Shut it down, someone shouted. Cut the transmission. We can't, came the reply. It's on every channel, social media, it's everywhere. Back in the studio, Ouattara continued. The dam had burst and the words flowed like water. I signed agreements that gave French companies first rights to our resources. I allowed French military bases to operate without oversight. I let them control our currency, our reserves, our future. And in return, they kept me in power. They eliminated my opponents. They funded my campaigns. They made sure I won. Tears were flowing freely now, not just from Ouattara, but from millions watching. I betrayed you, he said simply. I betrayed our independence. I betrayed the dreams of our founding fathers. For money, for power, for the illusion of stability. He looked directly into the camera. I know you cannot forgive me. I don't ask for forgiveness. I ask only that you learn from my mistakes, that you never again allow a leader to sell your birthright for personal gain. The broadcast continued for another hour. Ouattara revealed everything: names, dates, amounts, secret accounts in Switzerland, properties in Paris, bribes to ministers, threats to journalists. The whole rotten system laid bare. When it finally ended, Abidjan was silent. Then slowly people began to emerge from their homes. Not in anger, but in something more powerful: determination. In Senegal, President Macky Sall watched with growing unease. His phone rang. He didn't answer. In Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Niger, similar scenes played out. Leaders who had played the same game suddenly felt very vulnerable. General Doumbia watched from the control room. His aide approached. "General, what now?" "Now," said Doumbia, "we rebuild. But first we let the people process this. Let them grieve for what was stolen. Then we move forward." And Ouattara? He stays under protection. The people will decide his fate. But he did what we asked. He told the truth. Outside, the sun was high in the African sky. In the streets, people were talking, crying, planning. The spell was broken. The puppet strings were visible. And for the first time in decades, real change seemed possible. 3 days later, the waves reached every corner of Africa. In Chad, students marched demanding transparency. In Gabon, workers struck, refusing to load timber onto French ships without fair compensation. In Cameroon, lawyers filed suits challenging decades-old agreements. France tried to respond. The president gave a speech about partnership and mutual benefit. Nobody was listening. The ambassador to Ivory Coast requested an urgent meeting with General Doumbia. He was politely refused. "The general is busy," the secretary informed him. "He's meeting with representatives from the Cocoa Farmers Union." That meeting was historic. For the first time, the actual producers of Ivory Coast's wealth were at the table. Not French executives, not corrupt ministers, farmers, workers, the people who made the country run. "We want fair prices," said the union leader, an elderly woman named Aminata Cohn. "We want to know where our cocoa goes and for how much." "You'll have it," Doumbia promised. "Full transparency, every contract, every sale, public knowledge." Meanwhile, economists were working overtime. How could Ivory Coast survive without French support? The predictions were dire: currency collapse, economic freefall, chaos. But something unexpected happened. Other countries stepped forward, not to exploit, but to trade fairly. China offered infrastructure deals with transparent terms. India wanted cocoa partnerships. Brazil shared agricultural technology. Even some European countries, embarrassed by France's exposure, offered honest cooperation. The CFA franc didn't collapse. It was replaced. A new West African currency, backed not by France but by the resources and productivity of the region itself. In his house arrest, Ouattara watched these developments with mixed emotions. Part of him wanted to see Doumbia fail, to be vindicated. But another part, a part that had been suppressed for 30 years, felt something like hope. One evening, a month after the broadcast, he had an unexpected visitor, Aminata Kone, the farmers' union leader. "Why did you come?" Ouattara asked. The old woman studied him. "I wanted to see the man who stole from us for 30 years, but also the man who finally told the truth." "I'm sorry," Ouattara said. The words felt inadequate. "Sorry doesn't bring back 30 years, Aminata replied. "But your confession might save the next 30. My grandchildren might grow up in a free country because you spoke." She left without another word. Ouattara sat in silence, processing her words. Redemption might be impossible, but perhaps his confession could be his legacy. 6 months later, Ivory Coast held its first truly free elections. No French money, no foreign interference, just people choosing their future. The winner was surprising. Not a politician, but a teacher named David Kouassi, who had led the transparency movement. His first act was to establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. "We must know our past to build our future," he said in his inauguration speech. "Every contract, every deal, every betrayal must be examined, not for revenge, but for learning." General Doumbia, true to his word, had stepped aside after the transition. He returned to his hometown where he opened a small farm. Journalists sometimes found him there, working the soil. "Any regrets?" they would ask. "No," he would reply. "I did what was necessary. Now others must do what comes next." The transformation wasn't easy. There were setbacks, conflicts, moments of doubt. Some people wanted to return to the old ways, stability at any price, but the majority pushed forward. French companies, faced with real competition for the first time, had to adapt. Some left, others stayed, but on new terms: fair wages, environmental protection, tax compliance. The market, freed from monopoly, flourished. The story spread across Africa like wildfire. In country after country, people demanded their own moments of truth. Some leaders, seeing the writing on the wall, initiated reforms. Others resisted and fell. It became known as the Ouattara effect, the paradox of a corrupt leader whose confession sparked a continental awakening. University students wrote dissertations about it. Musicians composed songs. It became part of the new African narrative. A year later, an international journalist interviewed Ouattara, still under house arrest but now allowed visitors. "Do you regret the confession?" she asked. Ouattara thought for a long moment. "I regret that I had something to confess. But the confession itself? Number. It was the first honest thing I did in 30 years." What would you tell other African leaders in similar positions? That the game is ending, that the people are waking up, that it's better to speak the truth willingly than have it dragged out of you. And France? France will adapt or be left behind. The colonial era is over. The neo-colonial era is ending. What comes next depends on whether they can see Africans as partners, not subjects. The interview went viral. In Paris, it was discussed in cafes and cabinet meetings. The old Africa hands insisted it was temporary, that things would return to normal. The younger generation wasn't so sure. In Abidjan, life continued. The port was busier than ever, but now the profits stayed home. The markets were full, and farmers could afford what they sold. Schools were being built with cocoa money that once went to Swiss banks. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems. Corruption didn't disappear overnight. Infrastructure took time to build. Changing mindsets was slow. But there was something new in the air. Hope, real hope. And it all started with a question. One simple question on a humid night when a general with 12 soldiers walked into a palace and demanded the truth. What are the real numbers? Sometimes that's all it takes. Someone brave enough to ask, someone desperate enough to answer, and a people ready enough to listen. 5 years later, Ouattara died quietly in his sleep. His funeral was small, attended by family and a few old friends. But across Ivory Coast, people paused to remember. Not the man who betrayed them, but the man who finally told the truth. General Doumbia, now gray-haired and tired, attended the funeral. As the coffin was lowered, he whispered, "You kept your word. Rest now." The transformation of Ivory Coast became a case study in universities worldwide. How a nation broke free not through violence, but through truth. How confession became revolution. How one question changed everything. In the new Ivory Coast, children learned a different history, not of subservience and exploitation, but of resistance and redemption. They learned about the night when 12 soldiers walked into a palace, about the general who asked for truth instead of power, about the president who chose confession over comfortable lies. Most importantly, they learned that change was possible, that systems built over decades could fall in hours. That truth, however painful, was the foundation of freedom. The French companies that remained learned to compete fairly. The new government, transparent and accountable, attracted honest investment. The economy, freed from the stranglehold of colonial extraction, began to truly develop. Other African nations watched and learned. Some followed Ivory Coast's path willingly. Others were pushed by their people. The dominoes fell one by one. The old order, built on exploitation and maintained by corruption, crumbled. In Paris, in the halls of power, they spoke of the Doumbia doctrine, the idea that legitimacy came not from foreign support, but from serving one's people. Old Africa hands retired or adapted. New policies were drafted, acknowledging African sovereignty not as a gift to be granted, but a reality to be respected. The world watched Africa with new eyes, not as a continent to be pitied or exploited, but as a partner in global affairs. The resources were still there: cocoa, coffee, gold, oil. But now they benefited the people who produced them. And in Abidjan, in a small museum dedicated to the transformation, visitors could see the piece of paper that started it all. Framed under glass, yellowed with age, the question that changed a continent. What was the real value of all the cocoa, coffee, gold, and oil that Ivory Coast exported in the last 10 years? And how much of that value stayed in the country? Below it, a plaque. Sometimes the right question at the right moment can change everything. General Seiko Dumbia asked this question on the night of January 15, 2023. President Alassane Ouattara answered truthfully, and Africa was never the same. School children would visit, stare at the simple piece of paper, and understand that power wasn't just in guns or money. Sometimes the greatest power was in demanding the truth, and sometimes the greatest courage was in telling it. The story became legend, told and retold across the continent. How a general with a question brought down a system, how a president's confession sparked a revolution, how Africa finally said enough. And in the quiet moments when old men gathered to talk of the past and young people dreamed of the future, they would remember the night when everything changed. The night when General Doumbia walked into a palace with just 12 soldiers and one question. The night when the truth finally set them free.